Hi, I'm Dashiell Nason, and this is my user experience design final presentation. My presentation is on Brochure, a product that I work on and manage. So on the agenda for this presentation will be a little bit of a kind of story from beginning to end on, we'll start with what is Brochure, and we'll go over some of the business goals of the company. And then we'll talk about the user research that I used to kind of define the problem and decide what I was going to work on in Brochure for this project. And then we'll also talk about a competitor analysis to be able to get your head a little bit around the space that Brochure competes in and how it can differentiate itself. And then I'll share with you my design strategy as I set out to make improvements in the product. And then lastly, it'll be the design process and what I actually did to actually achieve these improvements. So first off, what is Brochure? Brochure is a web-based product for non-designers who want to make good-looking digital sales and marketing materials to market and sell their products and services. So what exactly does a brochure look like? Well, as you can probably tell from the name, brochure is a play on the word brochure. And that's because brochures are very much resemble the structure of a paper brochure, but in a slick, responsive digital format. They are very reliant on imagery, and you'll see that there's beautiful images throughout brochure that really are really the true essence of what captures viewers and why the product has such a good reputation for visitors viewing many pages of brochures. So we'll talk about the business goals of the product in a broad sense, and they're pretty straightforward, but the first one is to have more brochures created. Because the product charges on a volume basis, a higher amount of volume equals more subscription revenue. And secondly, the second broad goal is to have more brochures shared because a higher distribution of brochures out there in the world gives us more potential for new users. So next we'll dive right into the user research that I conducted and during this project, and also for many months before this project. And the first form of that was interviews, sometimes over the phone, sometimes in person. And I've taken the feedback from those interviews and put together a few personas, and I'll share the most important two with you here. So the first one here is the creative. And this is Judah. She's a wedding planner out of San Francisco, and she's an ultra creative. She produces high-end weddings, and what she really needs from the product is a visual way to communicate her creativity to her potential clients. Her tech knowledge is actually pretty decent, so she's not too worried about the usability aspect, but more so she's really concerned about having an enjoyable technology experience and to be able to communicate her message across, which I touched on earlier. Now, the next persona is very different. We have Brad here from Telluride. He's a marketing director, and I call this persona the usability conscious. So Brad is super busy. He runs a marketing strategy for a very wide product, and he already spends too much time in meetings, and he has a full plate. What he wants to do is he wants to free up some of his resources by passing brochure along to several different people along his company, whether they be in weddings or restaurants and so forth. But in order for him to feel comfortable doing so, he has to know that this tool is extremely easy to use, that the run-up time to getting other people on the product has to be short, and that's the only way he's going to work with the product. So I took, this is an empty map that maps out the kind of the worries and the goals of the users, and I've kind of taken all that and really just summed it up in one simple, straightforward sentence. What the users want is they want to make good-looking stuff that makes them more money without it being too difficult or taking too much of their time. Easier said than done, but that's what we're shooting for here. So to get an idea of what we're competing with out there in the space, before I started designing, I thought it was important to understand how the other products are rating on several different metrics. And but And I've done some grids here that rates the competitors on several different metrics, but the most important ones that I want to discuss with you are, first of all, usability, which is basically how easy is this product to use. Secondly, navigation, how intuitive is it to navigate across the product? How do you know where you are in the product? Do you know how to get out of the section that you're in? Would you know how to go where you want to go, to change what you want to change? And the last one is required expertise, and this has to do specifically with design expertise. And so I'll also rate the competing products on how much expertise they require from you to use it. So I have a couple of these spider grids here. I'll actually skip to the second one because I think it's more relevant. But if we take a look here, we have brochure, lucid press, and flipping book all on this, what we call spider grid. And we'll look at the first one, usability here, and we'll see that lucid press is really doing a fantastic job here. They have a very easy to use site as far as the user interface goes. And brochure is doing pretty well, but there is definitely room to improve. Secondly, we'll look at the navigation here, and brochure is doing just as well as lucid press and flipping book, but of course I think that it could really be important for us to improve this a little further, and if we can move closer towards this top rung here, we'd be in really good shape. But lastly, the most important part here to understand is the required expertise section, and this really is brochure's ultimate differentiator. As you can see, they lie down here way low because the required design expertise to use brochure is basically zero. The only design options that a user can make in brochure is changing the layouts. We like to say it's difficult to build something that looks bad in brochure, and as I notice here, we'll flip back to the other grid. It's the same thing going on here, that this is brochure's true differentiator. And I had to keep this in mind throughout the design process, that whatever changes I make, I cannot increase the amount of required expertise because then brochure loses its differentiator. And also really what I wanted to set out was to increase our navigation and our usability. So I went ahead and put together a design strategy. How was I going to achieve these goals? What portion of the product was most important to focus on to achieve these goals? So what was it? To make the content production experience easier and more enjoyable. So I specifically selected the content production experience because it's such a core aspect of the product that every user comes in contact with almost every time they use brochure. And so that was why I chose that. And how was I going to do that? Well, I wanted to improve the navigation of the content production experience and the user interface and the production flow. And I decided to do so in a what you see is what you get theme. And that's a pretty popular design theme out there today, and it's known for its intuitiveness and really being a straightforward and enjoyable experience. And why was I going to do this? Well, so users create and share more materials, which relates back to the business goals. And if you look again here at this what up top here, that relates directly to the two personas that I share for the creative and for the usability conscious, to make more enjoyable and to make it easier to use. So I jumped right into some user testing of how this, with the current content editor. And I found several existing issues with the current editor, and I'll go through them here and show you the video in real time. And so, as you'll see here, with the current editor, when you go to edit a page, the content modal pops up and really obstructs about 60 to 70% of the page. And this editing that's going on right now is actually going on in real time in the background, but unfortunately, because of the size and the positioning of this modal, it's actually blocking all of that, so I can't see any of the changes going on. In order for me to see it, I have to exit out of this modal or save my changes to see what's happened, and that's just less than optimal. Secondly, I noticed while watching a lot of users that they would add all their content, their photos, their text, and so forth, and then they'd want to play with the layout and play around with it until they found a layout that they liked and wanted to keep. But fortunately, the way that you do that is by clicking edit this page, scrolling down to the layout, scrolling all the way down to the Save Changes button, and then seeing if you like it. And if you don't, do that all again. Edit this cover page, scroll down, layout, scroll down, Save Changes. And that, of course, is less than optimal as well. It's taking something that really should be fun and enjoyable, manipulating your content like that, into something that's rather tedious. Also, it was impossible to understand what these layouts would look like. The only way to find out was to just try them. But there's no visual cue here of what is this going to do to my content. And this was actually a big blocker for a lot of users that would just stop dead in their tracks at this point, and they would go, I don't know what an image grid is, I don't know what to do. And lastly, the last two major issues was that the Save Changes button and many of the editing actions lie well below the fold, and people would actually miss the Save Changes button, and they would spend time making all these edits, and then all of a sudden the page would refresh and their changes weren't saved, and they were confused and upset. And the last one I missed was that the text editing actually that goes on in the modal would then be transferred to the actual page, and often there would be differences, inconsistencies that would come from the transferring from the modal to the page, and that was unfortunate. But that was mostly user interface stuff that I noticed those issues with, but there were other issues I noticed further than the user interface that actually occurred in the production process. And this I will also go through in a short video with you. But the first one being that the flow is not very intuitive. And right now I'm creating a new brochure here. And as you'll see, I'm then led to this empty page where there's no cues for me to understand what the next step in the process is. So I hit that page and I'm kind of stuck. I'm not really sure what to do next. Secondly, when a user creates a new page or a new article, it's just this, as you can see here, it's these big white blank pages and articles. And while again, this is not very intuitive, more so, it's just not enjoyable. It's not inspiring to be hit with these blank pages. You know, brochure is all about creating something beautiful and creating something fun and inspiring, and getting hit with these blank white pages is just not very inspiring. So I knew I wanted to change something about that to make the experience more enjoyable. So now we're jumping into the actual my own personal design process and how I got started in redesigning the content editor. And what I did was, with the help of a designer, we brainstormed several different ways that the new content editor could look and work. And we used the divergent convergent process, where we started with as many ideas as we possibly could, and then I printed them all out on sheets of paper, as you can see here, and I took green post-its and I posted the positive things that I felt about each design on them, and also the negative things in red that I didn't like about each design. I then took all the green post-its and put them on one side, and took all the red ones and put it on the other side, and said, okay, the right design, or at least the right design to start with, is the one that contains most of the green qualities, the positive qualities, and the least of the red qualities, the negative qualities. And the design that was closest to that was this one, which we call the sidebar. And this one is the idea of all the content editing tools lying within a sidebar on the page. And the benefits of this, as you can see, is it obstructs much less of the content. The different editing actions are split out. So if I just want to change my layout, I can just change my layout without bringing up all the other options and having to scroll through everything and so forth. I can just go change layout, boom, boom. And of course, because of this, nothing lies below the fold, so we're not missing any buttons here, we're not missing any editing actions. The layouts are visualized, which you can't see here, but I'll show you a little later. And lastly, it provided an opportunity to guide a user through a proper flow, and to make the flow and understanding what the next steps were a lot more obvious. So what I did next was I built a prototype with this idea for the sidebar, and this is a video from it right here. And it was it was a great learning experience building this prototype. I learned a lot from it and tested it with a bunch of users. And this sidebar was basically changing every single day because of the feedback I was getting from users. And right away, I was just finding out all sorts of holes in this design that um, that hadn't been fully thought out yet. But I knew I was onto something good because people were really having fun with it and thought it was done in a really cool way. The most interesting thing that I found out from uh, developing this prototype and testing it with users was actually had to do with the text editing. So as you saw a little earlier, and you'll see again in this video, is that the way initially I thought people would edit text was to click the edit text button where you'd have a small pop-out window and you could edit your text right there. You click save and that would then transfer the text to the page. But unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, one of my testers took the task of testing very seriously and was typing out a full paragraph. And it became very clear that putting together a full paragraph and text editing it in a small box like this was just not going to do it. It's too small, it's too cramped, and also it still has to transcribe to the page, which we already had issues with that in the prior design. So the next idea was to do it in line, where you would just click on the text, as you can see here, and change it on the spot. And you click enter, you click out, and it's saved. And what you see is what you get. What you write on the page is what it looks like. There's no transcribing going on, and it's just straightforward. And you have plenty of room to do the text editing. So that's about it. Just looking forward, the next steps to carry out this design are going to be to start building out the new sidebar editor because we've done extensive testing and got it to a point where we're pretty happy with it, and we want to build out the first section of it and release it to the users and start improving from there. And so once we do that, of course, we'll continue to test, and of course, iterate, iterate, iterate. Okay, thank you very much.